All right, we are back. Peanut Gallery.
Yeah, let's talk about the sorry state of journalism in professional wrestling today. And we're not just talking about Dave Meltzer, but he is a big reason in I guess maybe a decline in the quality of journalism in pro wrestling. I know that obviously Dave Meltzer was one of the originals. Like he was the formulator pretty much of the dirt sheets back in the 80s.
Right.
He was the guy that started it.
Covering wrestling journalism, I think, in like the early 80s.
Yes, so it was 1982 when he started his magazine, which was then called
The Wrestling Observer.
Right, the Wrestling Observer newsletter, and then he merged with
F4W
then he merged with F4W Online, and now it's pretty much one and the same.
Yeah.
Most famously, F4W, the Wrestling Observer newsletter, whatever you want to call it, they're pretty well known in the industry for a couple of different things. Number one, obviously the journalism. They are one of the biggest sources of I guess what you wouldn't want to call primary source information.
Yeah.
So the information that Dave does get is pretty well sourced from the actual dirt sheets.
Right. They have the inside source.
Right.
Meltzer was the first one to really have that. Now, that has expanded.
It has. Yes, it has.
Generally, when you think of... I would consider the Wrestling Observer and F4W the mainstream media for pro wrestling.
And
as a whole.
And again, it is one of the largest pieces, and they have a lot of journalists and a lot of writers who go out to like shows, for example, and report on the shows.
Right.
They have a lot of people backstage that they know through whatever contacts they have in order to get some news sources. They have corporate people who know like contracts and how those negotiations go. So he's pretty well known in the industry for that. The other thing, of course, is awards, which is somewhat infamous. It's a mixed bag. It really just depends on how you want to look at it. Obviously, this picture right here is, what's his name?
Brian Alvarez.
Yes, Brian Alvarez. He's the other guy. He founded F4W.
Right, and he's like the right-hand man and really controls a lot of not only the awards now are voted on by the people.
Right.
We talked about that very extensively on how that is so skewed one way.
Right. And we won't go into the awards, but they're also very well known for those awards. And it gives people an idea of what the landscape looks like. Now, obviously, it's gotten a little more skewed over the past couple of years.
But that's the issue.
Right.
Is that the top, I would consider, mainstream source of wrestling information for decades, it has become an AEW cocksucking factory.
Pretty much, and you can see that with
so obvious.
And you can see that with some very recent examples. Of course, the awards, we can go in and out of that. But another thing that Dave is well known for are his star ratings for matches, and when you compare two. Perfect example. You compare two Iron Man matches, the Shawn Michaels Bret Hart Iron Man match and the MJF Bryan Danielson Iron Man match that just happened. Dave gave the original, the probably one of the best matches of all time, 4.5 stars at that time, or was it 4 stars at the time? The Bret Hart Shawn Michaels Iron Man match, which many people consider to be one of the greatest professional wrestling matches of all time, a 4-star rating. He gives something like MJF and Bryan Danielson, a match that was okay, but it wasn't great.
And there's a lot of people who agree with that sentiment. They're like, it was okay, but it just did not get to that level.
And he rated it 5 3/4 stars,
which is ridiculous.
And he has a tendency now. If you look at the I guess the star ratings, the quality has kind of declined in what he's willing to give multiple stars or even 5-star, 6-star, 7-star matches to. The quality of that I think in many people's opinions has declined.
I think it's ridiculous that he has gone above the 5-star rating. I think it should say, because we do the 2 thumbs up, 1 thumbs up, whatever system, but this is it.
Right, we can't give it a 3 thumbs up.
It's like, if I could, I probably would, but at the same time, we call it how we see it here.
Right.
and we're not wrestling journalists by any stretch of the imagination. Like,
Right.
we're not, but we call it how
We're
we see it.
we're just two guys with a couple of microphones.
Exactly. But I think that we can approach difficult topics and subjects and really let you know what is actually this. This
Right.
is reality.
Right.
But these people with those awards saying, oh, only paid subscribers now vote. This was the first year that they ever did this.
Right, and that's why it skewed so heavily towards AEW. But again, we talked about that a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah, but that is a crux of how bad this has gotten
Right.
now. And this is not these are not the only two outliers here that do
Right.
this.
But let's talk about, in my opinion, maybe something that's a little more balanced in the Pro Wrestling Illustrated magazine. They have awards as well that they give out.
These are the awards that I will actually look at
Right.
with some sort of sincerity.
I'm not 100% sure how they use. I'm not 100% sure what their methodology is. We would have to probably talk to Wade Keller about that because this is his.
That's his.
This is his baby. So, he obviously this one is a little more, I guess, niche because it's not entirely online, but you can find online issues, but they are still very much a traditional magazine.
Right.
Then they have covered pro wrestling for almost as long as Dave Meltzer has with the Wrestling Observer newsletter. So
Right.
think of them as kind of competitors in this space.
Well, I would say Meltzer has become more mainstream because especially when the steroid trials
Yes.
were going on and the oh god, what was it? The Ring Boy scandal
Right.
that happened back in the early '80s. The mainstream media went to Meltzer instead of Keller at that time.
Right, but Keller has access to a lot of the same information.
Right.
It's just disseminated a lot differently.
And I think it's actually more accurate when he does it instead of Dave does, because Dave and Brian, I'll be honest with you, between the two companies, they've really gone off the deep end.
Yeah, they've
Super
really
weird.
become very AEW centric.
Very AEW centric, very judgmental as
Yeah.
it relates to. It's weird.
Yeah, it is.
I think they've kind of lost the plot
Yeah.
on what it truly is. And Dave lives in an echo chamber.
He does.
I've been blocked by him for a while when I actually approached him with a legitimate question.
Right.
I literally remember the question.
Right.
He just ignored me and
Right.
totally blocked me. And I'm like, okay, you ridiculous little shit, whatever. Ryan Sean Sapp or whatever his fucking name.
Oh,
Sean
yeah.
Ryan Sapp.
Sean Ross Sapp, he is.
He has a whole other bucket of worms.
Oh yeah, and I didn't include him in this, but let's talk about him because he.
with Wrestling Inc.
Yeah, he runs Wrestling Inc. Now, Wrestling Inc. is not entirely a dirt sheet.
It's more so of an aggregator.
It is. It's not.
Of
It's not
information.
right
So-
because Sean Ross Sapp, he does have access to dirt sheet information.
Right, and there are articles that are put on there on Wrestling Inc. But there is a lot of stuff that comes outside, and they just kind of put it in.
And they
there.
just right.
And they have a lot of outside independent journalists
Yes.
who also come in and do their own thing.
Yep.
But they have, they have Fightful, they have their own little show, whatever.
Right.
They have those things, which is the original content that they have
Right.
with like Will Washington and Denise, whatever the fuck her name was.
Yep.
And then obviously Sapp, but Sapp, I think morally he's just more of an asshole than
Right.
anybody. And I think but the issue is that people look at him as a legitimate person, and he uses he's a scumbag.
He uses his influence and power to kind of manipulate the narrative.
Exactly.
Which
Beautiful.
is even worse than, in my opinion, someone like a Dave Meltzer.
Yeah.
At least Dave Meltzer tries to be non-biased, but his methodology and the way he approaches it has just been skewed so heavily, and the quality has gone down so much.
There is a reason why people believe that the Wrestling Observer newsletter is being paid off by AEW. It's because
of the reputation that they have built since the founding of the company.
right. People went to them, and we see the pattern of
Right.
what it was then into what it is now.
Right.
It's like you never did this with WCW.
No.
You never did this when TNA was actually
Like a legitimate more mainstream second-tier wrestling product.
Right. It never happened
Right.
until AEW. That's when this stuff changed, and that's when everybody's scratching their heads and thinking. It's like, is this really where I want to go to
Right.
get my wrestling information? But let's talk about somebody who I would say is an outsider coming in and threatening the general narrative, and that's Ariel Helwani.
Right, and I was going to talk about him for a couple of weeks now. Just based off of his experiences with the Elimination Chamber, he's really kind of putting himself on the scene, but he is skewed very pro WWE, not pro not even neutral. But he doesn't like AEW's product, and he has legitimate beef with Tony Khan over the presentation of that product. And he's part of a whole other class of journalists. He is not a pro wrestling journalist. He is a combat sports journalist who went to school to be a journalist. He doesn't have he might have access to the WWE's dirt sheets, but he doesn't have access to all the dirt sheets.
Right.
He didn't come out of that era, so his style is very different than what you would expect with a product like Pro Wrestling Illustrated or Wrestling Observer Newsletter.
Exactly. Now, Ariel Helwani, I would say, is more mainstream technically.
Well, yeah, because he is.
Well,
I think isn't he an ESPN journalist? I believe.
Yes.
So yeah, very much mainstream. He's being paid by Disney.
Right. It's like Ryan Satin.
Right.
Ryan Satin is being paid by Fox.
Right.
Now.
Right.
And Ryan Satin, I would say, is kind of that underlier of somebody who I will actually take seriously.
Right.
For the most part. Now, obviously, with journalism, there has to have some sort of scrutiny when it comes to it.
Right.
I mean, obviously, it does. But I would say that Ariel Helwani is doing this with WWE as a spiteful move.
Maybe.
I mean, this is only what I am predicting because based on what I saw. I saw the interviews with him
Yep.
and Tony Khan. I see how they interact online. It's not good on Tony Khan.
No.
Tony Khan wants to start the beef with Ariel.
Right.
It's like Ariel is very mainstream.
Right.
So
And we're gonna see we see a lot more of that too with publications like ESPN, with publications like Sports Illustrated, with again Fox doing their thing, and so there's this sort of I guess this narrative is. As wrestling again becomes more mainstream, the product and the people who cover it are also going to come from more of those mainstream sources.
right. I mean, if you really want the accurate information to the to the bee's knees, to the nth degree, I would actually say, New York Post has been putting out stuff that has been right down the middle.
Right.
Where they show you what's what for the most part, and I want to see more of that.
And again, so this is Wade Keller. He's the guy who does Pro Wrestling Illustrated, a
And
magazine.
Pro Wrestling Torch back
Right.
in the day. I think it still exists, but I remember reading Pro Wrestling Torch, 10 years ago now?
Yeah, I don't think Pro Wrestling Torch even exists. But again, he's a guy with a lot of backstage know-how, a lot of access to dirt sheets.
Right.
And again, maybe his stuff might be more accurate than your typical. Or not more accurate, because Dave Meltzer tends to be very accurate, because he has access to the same dirt sheets.
Right, and here's the thing. It's not accuracy, it's interpretation
Right.
is kind of where it
Exactly.
is. And instead of just saying, this is what I got from my sources, done, end of sentence, you're starting to put certain ideas.
Right, you're
into
starting to
people's minds. You're
right.
trying to you're incorporating your own stuff into the
Your own
information,
opinions, right.
Where it's going to be hard to distinguishingly look at these two things and say, this is opinion, this is fact.
Right.
They don't do that
Right.
with when it comes to
The
wrestling
fans have a hard time interpreting facts.
Well, especially his fucking fans.
Right.
Talk about an echo chamber of nonsense.
Right.
I mean, good lord.
But let's talk about this one final class of journalists, and these are people who
Would you
were
call that a journalist?
well. He's in the same sort of boat as someone like Eric Bischoff or someone else or other former pro wrestlers, former professional wrestling managers, former promoters who have access to these to the dirt sheets again because of their involvement in the industry physically.
These people have more of on-hand knowledge
Yes.
of what's actually happening.
Say what
within
you
the
want
industry.
about someone like Jim Cornette. Say what you want about...
Right now, Eric Bischoff is like the most hated man
Right.
within the scope of AEW because he tells it how it is. Now, Jim Cornette is obviously public enemy number one, but Eric
Right.
Bischoff has been really making some waves as of
Right.
late when it comes to
But you can't,
the cult of
right? But
AEW.
you can't discount their knowledge.
No.
And you cannot discount the fact that yes, they still have access to these dirt sheets because guess what? A lot of them are still friends with a lot of people inside the industry.
Yeah, I mean, Eric Bischoff actually beat WWE for quite some time, and
Right.
Jim Cornette has literally done everything from taking pictures of the wrestlers to booking the wrestling
Right.
stuff to in-ring. Like he has physically competed. It's not like Jim Cornette is an
Right.
idiot.
But these guys tend to do a little more on the podcasting side,
Right.
not so much on. Which again, podcasting is a very important form of media that cannot be discounted. Because
Even us,
Right.
Like literally even us who aren't the biggest podcasters in the world, but we try to give you the information that's needed.
So you have
with a little bit of
right.
comfort.
So you have three really big sources of wrestling news
but now-
or dissemination.
Right, but now the question is, which dissemination can you truly trust?
And I think this is where it's important for you to have a variety of different sources of information.
People, stop being lazy and look at the sources of these stories. If you
Right.
see something that looks weird, do your own research.
Right.
It's not going to be spoon-fed to you all the time, and it takes not even 5 minutes.
No, it does not. But it's kind of like any news. You have to look at a variety of different sources. So listen or read transcripts of podcasts from industry insiders. You don't have to agree with all their opinions, but if they're saying something that is factually wrestling related, they're probably going to be a little more accurate than your average Joe.
I'm sure somebody like Jim Cornette does not like our show for obvious reasons.
Right. But he has a lot of accurate information because he has a lot of industry knowledge and he has a lot of industry insiders.
For decades.
Yes.
And also, Jim Cornette is a pro wrestling collector. He has
Right.
a huge collection.
People like Ariel Helwani or Ryan Satin that you had mentioned. That is again probably going to be a little more mainstream information. It won't be so technical, but they are going to have accurate information from whichever sources they decide to source from. Because, for example, Ariel Helwani will probably have, dirt sheets from WWE.
Right.
Because he works so closely with them.
Just like with Meltzer,
Mm-hmm.
who will most likely skew with AEW.
But he
for that.
still has dirt sheets from the WWE. So if
Absolutely.
he says something, or Wade Keller, or whoever, they probably have information that is at least somewhat accurate based on the people that they have the industry insider information with.
Right.
And it's much different than a lot of other sports. I mean, other sports, yes, they have, they'll have their dirt sheets too, but wrestling is unique in kind of the history of developing these dirt sheets and how it wasn't really the television providers who did it. It was people within the industry who just had a passion for journalism.
Exactly. And I think that's what makes pro wrestling journalists so unique within of themselves. It's because of that passion.
Right.
And but that's just all of wrestling in general.
Yeah.
We're all very passionate about it. And I mean, there are people who like football and teams, but wrestling is like a different animal
Right.
within of itself.
It is.
So it's kind of cool to see that
Yep.
even the journalistic part of it has that same sort of passion
Yeah.
and mentality.
But as far as biases go, just look for patterns. Mm-hmm. That's pretty much it.
Yep,
You'll see that very clearly if you stop and think about it.
Not one kind of source or one source in general should be 100,000,000% discredited, but look at the information that they're giving you and just make sure. Like the Observer Newsletter Awards this year, from before anybody could vote on it. But then they changed it over to the paid subscribers to do that. So when you see the best pay-per-view in the world being Forbidden Door, double check on that.
Right.
Make sure that it's something where you can look at that and say, that makes sense.
Right.
Or John
Just
Moxley
make-
being the wrestler
right.
of the year. it's a bit ridiculous.
Right. But that's pretty much all I've got at this point. I just wanted to touch on the journalism of pro wrestling, especially as we approach WrestleMania season. But what are we talking about next week?
So next week, we're not sure. We'll figure it out now. I'll let you know. But as always, remember to like, subscribe, or leave a rating wherever you are. I saw that our Spotify is growing quite quickly here. So leave a review, hopefully 5 stars. But no matter where you are, we appreciate your
Support.
Your support, obviously. Get a hat. There will be a link in the description wherever you are. And become a patron as well at MPWMA at patreon.com, where you get cool stuff, including signed merch and all that fun stuff. But as always, be
Majestic.